The Baltimore Ravens introduced running back Derrick Henry to the team at his first Ravens press conference. We talk about major takeaways from Henry, John Harbaugh, Eric DeCosta, and a lot more, all coming up next here on this instant reaction edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, coming to you from the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. As always, thanks so much for being here, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. We are free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube, where you can like this video, subscribe to the channel. Also in audio form, wherever you get your shows, you can follow along there as well. We bring you 5 days a week of Ravens content, of course, Monday through Friday, plus these bonus instant reaction episodes, whether any big news happens, big press conferences like this one, or we do them after Ravens games as well. So really exciting. And this team right now, I know they've lost a lot of free agents, but Derrick Henry being the big fish that they have brought in. So that in itself is very exciting too. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Game Time. Download Game Time app, create an account, use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. I think that the Derrick Henry press conference was big enough to where we could live stream it and kind of talk about a little brief Thursday afternoon episode. I've been doing a lot of live streams here because, well, free agency has a lot of moving pieces and moving parts, and Derrick Henry, a really big signing for Baltimore. And this wasn't just, Derrick Henry obviously gave a lot of answers. We'll break down what he had to say and the takeaways from Derrick himself, but also John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta both spoke. And for those guys, I mean, you really have to think about, look, they're asked questions, not just about Derrick Henry, but about the state of the team, state of free agency, the state of the roster, everybody leaving. So we'll talk about that as well, get into an updated look at Ravens free agency, and of course, what's next for the Ravens. So if you have any thoughts in the chat, if you're live, you can put those in and we can talk about them. I see Reagan in the chat saying, what's up? I appreciate you tuning in. Steven saying we're all happy, long time coming. I see Cam putting the crown emojis in there. I'm loving that. And Steven, thanks, Kevin, for going live. I appreciate you tuning in here, Steven. So if you missed these episodes live, you can follow along and catch them after the fact in both video form and audio form too. Now, let's get into what Derrick Henry had to say. Said that this is where he wanted to be. And again, I know that some people say, that's such player speak, and he has to say that. But look, there's been a lot of smoke around this for a really long time, right? It's not like this is new information. Derrick Henry, this was new to everybody. For Derrick Henry, and Eric DeCosta admitted this is something we'll talk about with DeCosta, but essentially the Ravens tried to trade for Henry at the trade deadline last year, and it didn't necessarily work out. The rumors and the rumblings of the Titans ended up saying no to the deal. The Titans owner did. So, I mean, regardless of what is true and what is not, but it was a fact that the Ravens had their eye on Derrick Henry, and it has felt like Derrick Henry, even though he was very loyal to Tennessee, spent a really good 8 years there, was looking for a fresh start, and Baltimore ended up making it happen with Derrick Henry. Now, there was a question asked of Derrick Henry about what's your response to people who say your best years are behind you and how much do you have left in the tank due to your age? And he just said, tell him to keep watching. And then Eric DeCosta very funnily interjected, or it was humorous. He said, they say the same thing about you to the reporter about how much does the reporter have left in the tank. So it was a little funny back and forth there. And Derrick Henry said, hey, you know what? You're still here too. But yeah, he was very adamant. Yeah, just tell him to keep watching. And Derrick Henry's a 30-year-old running back. I think we all know the conversations that go around 30-year-old running backs in particular, which is, they're washed. They're done. They can't play anymore. Last legs. But we have seen quite the opposite with Derrick Henry, where he actually logged faster speeds on the field in 2023 than he did in 2019 or 2020 or 2021 even. So that to me is the really important part of it as well, because look, you can talk about, yes, there is a steep decline when it comes to 30 in running backs. We have seen that historically, but Derrick Henry's not to that point yet. Is he prime Derrick Henry? Is he peak of the peak Derrick Henry, like offensive player of the year? Probably not, right? But you can still say he's one of the best 5 running backs in this league. And you're talking about quarterback running back duos we're going to have this conversation a little later on another episode soon. But I think Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry is up there and honestly might be number one. So that to me is another really exciting aspect of this whole thing where, it's not just Derrick Henry coming in and it's like a veteran running back that has lost a lot of power and a lot of speed. Derrick Henry still is up there and Eric DeCosta said it, right? This is not a one-dimensional running back. I've been talking about it all week here on Locked On Ravens. He is someone who has the power. He bowls people over. That's what he's known for, right? But he has the speed. He can catch screen passes out of the backfield. He has some east-west as well. It's a blend of a lot of different things for Derrick Henry, not just him being one-dimensional in any way, shape, or form. Now, DeCosta also said, and this is going back to the trade conversation, DeCosta said that, Derrick Henry was the guy that he wanted to get in free agency. He said he had a good indication of that and admitted, honestly, that they tried to trade for Derrick for the trade deadline. He said it thought there was a reasonable chance that the trade would get done, but it didn't work out, and that was disappointing. But then Eric DeCosta said, quote, when you evaluate the tape, watch the player, you see the history of the player, you talk to the people who've been around the player, it made all the sense in the world for us to target Derrick. Derrick felt, definitely excited to be with the team. I thought that for overall, he gave a lot of indications, especially with Lamar, said that he was really excited to play with Lamar and said Lamar is so dynamic. And those two have a history together. And I'm sure, he was asked about if they had maybe talked about it before. And they both envisioned it, this, that, and the other. But on being with the Ravens, on actually choosing the Ravens over other teams, Derrick Henry said really was a no-brainer for me. This is where I knew I wanted to be. I love the style, the physicality that they play with. The Ravens are a super physical team, right? And they're one of the better run offenses. In fact, they have been the best rush offense in the league for a really, really long time. In my opinion, Derrick Henry, and I've said this before, the Ravens were fine with Gus Edwards, right? They were fine with J.K. Dobbins. Those guys thrived within that offense, but Derrick Henry raises both your floor and your ceiling, right? We can have the conversation about, paying running backs and how does that, in terms of allocation of resources, line up with what the team wants to do, but you're essentially strengthening a strength, right? They certainly still have needs. They still have weaknesses, right? That's I'm not shying away from that fact, and they aren't either. Eric DeCosta literally talked about the offensive line and said, look, 3 new starters potentially. And that to me was actually interesting in my opinion, because he ended up saying that's always going to be priority. That'll be the mission in the coming weeks to build that out. I think we're on our way. I think we have a good plan. We're fortunate that this draft class looks pretty good. I don't want to call it historically strong, but it looks like a very good crop of offensive linemen. We don't play games till September. We'll be ready. This is an indication to me the Ravens are taking at least 1 offensive lineman early, if not 2. I think Baltimore is going to be very offensive line focused coming up. And that's the whole thing, right? In order to block for Derrick Henry, in order to pass block for Lamar Jackson, you have to have good offensive linemen out there. It all starts in the trenches. And DeCosta, he has been a very big proponent in recent years of building out that offensive line, which again does not shock me whatsoever. So to me, I think, look, you sign the running back in Derrick Henry, you got to block for him, right? 100%. And a little more on Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry had to say, the full quote, he's so dynamic. I'm excited to play with him. He's had a great year. He had a great year this year, did a lot of great things. I just want to be an added piece of this offense. I'm trying to focus on coming in and earning the respect of my teammates. And he kind of alluded to a little bit more about, look, he's been in Tennessee for 8 years. And for him, it's about just getting his teammates to know him. The staff gets to know him too. It's coming into a new place. He's excited to come into a new place, but obviously there is a chapter of his life and his career that is closed. He's now opening a new exciting one in Baltimore. He seemed very excited to be with the team. And he said, I'm a Raven now. That's all that matters. I'm ready to go to work. And he actually talked a little bit about what his mindset was when facing the Ravens. This was really cool. He said, buckle your chin strap and get ready for a 60-minute fight. And that is because the Ravens, offensively, of the recent seasons, they have tried to, emulate that physicality. But where did the physicality start for the Ravens, right? Where did it start? It was defensively. The Ravens defenses, we can talk about the historic 2000s defenses, all those defenses led by Ray Lewis. Obviously, now Roquan Smith comes in as well. The physicality in Baltimore started with Ray Lewis and that Ravens defense. And over the course of, not that the Ravens haven't been physical on offense before, but they've emulated that over the years with bringing in guys like Patrick Ricard, bringing in those road graders. But for him, going up against that Ravens defense specifically. Now I know Derrick Henry didn't have to face off against Ray Lewis, but now he doesn't have to face off against Roquan Smith anymore, who to a lot of people is like the second coming of Ray Lewis there. So I thought that was really cool. And also I'll do a little quick, good positive note before we head into our first break here. Eric DeCosta was asked about Keaton Mitchell a little bit, and he said the rehab is going really well and said, we feel like he's on path to come back at some point this season. Also said they'll continue to assess the running back market. Mentioned the draft as well. I think Keaton, again, a lot of people have been wondering, when's the timeline for Keaton? When is he going to come back? Is he even going to be able to come back at the start of the season? It's good news for the Ravens that he could come back at least at some point. Obviously, I'm personally not expecting him to be back by the start of the season. I would anticipate maybe a mid to late season return for him based off of his injury, which is, the torn ACL happening in December. Gives you a little bit longer of a recovery time considering the season does start in September. But the good news is hopefully he will be back, and I wouldn't be shocked if the Ravens end up taking a running back later in the draft. This isn't a very strong running back class. It was a much stronger free agency running back group than it was in the draft. But in my opinion, you at least have the option to draft a later round running back, have him slot into the number 3 role, and then you can have Keaton Mitchell come back and essentially take over that role from that guy. Coming up, though, we have a lot to continue to dive into here on Locked On Ravens. We'll keep talking about takeaways from Derrick Henry's press conference, also talking about the latest updates in Baltimore Ravens free agency. Stay tuned. We have lots to dive into here on this live instant reaction edition of Locked On Ravens here on Thursday. First, this show is brought to you by Game Time. There have been a lot of frustrating ticket buying experiences in my life. Sometimes I wasn't really sure if the seats were good. Other times I couldn't find last-minute tickets. Sometimes there are just no good deals at all. You shouldn't have to worry, though, when you buy tickets to your next big event, because Game Time is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And the Game Time app, a lot of great things over there right now. Obviously, Orioles coming up on opening day, right? That's going to be really exciting, and also plenty of concerts in the Baltimore area as well. The Game Time app has a lot of great things on it, such as views from all the season of the venue. Plus, Game Time is the only ticket app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You can buy tickets in seconds with 2 taps. Plus, they're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on your tickets. With zone deals, you pick the section and Game Time picks the seats for big time savings. The guys we're going to buy in tickets with Game Time. Down the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON, spelled LOCKED1 for $20 off. Download Game Time to the last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're back our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Allstreicher still checking in with you live on Thursday afternoon after Derrick Henry's press conference with the Ravens, first as a Baltimore Raven. Really excited for Henry, the Henry era, as a lot of people are, right? This is a really exciting upgrade for the Baltimore Ravens running back room. Now, I see a lot in here about Debo and Eric DeCosta and the media and all this. I'll talk about the Debo thing for a second. I see Casey saying the Ravens need to get Debo so we can focus on offensive line, defensive line, and corner in the draft. And Abdi saying, do you think we can get some Debo Samuel? I see Adid also saying EDC taking shots at people. So yeah, just crazy where it was kind of like a back and forth, not like a, back and forth. The thing with Henry saying, oh, you got to watch, and Eric DeCosta saying, oh, they said the same thing about you in terms of him being watched. That was funny. Now, Eric DeCosta also had some other comments about the media. But in terms of Debo, I don't know I'll look it up while I'm talking here. But for Debo in particular, with the 49ers situation, it feels like they're going to have to move on from one of either, if we're talking about Brandon Ayuk or Debo Samuel, they're going to have to maybe move on from one of those two guys. Ayuk's up for an extension. Samuel right now has a $28.6 million cap hit. Now, you don't look at cap hits when you're talking about trades. You actually look at base salary for the most part here. So Debo's contract is up after next season. Debo has a $28 million cap hit this season for San Francisco, $24 million cap hit next year for San Francisco. There are also 2 void years tacked on the end of that deal. Now, for Debo, his base salary is about $21 million this year and $16.5 or $16.6 million next year. I don't know. For right now, the Ravens, they can clear up cap space still. They did a couple of those moves yesterday with Ronnie Stanley and Tyus Bowser, trading Morgan Moses away, obviously, as well. Now, for Debo, it's going to cost you probably, I don't think the Ravens will ever trade a first-round pick in the Eric DeCosta era. I just think he values them too much, and the Ravens, and they need them in the Lamar Jackson, big contract era as well. But for me, I think that, this Debo thing never really had any legs to begin with. We can have the conversation about it in terms of wide receivers, but maybe they look at it down the line, but I don't think there was any substance to it really to begin with. So it's not necessarily something I'm going to spend a whole segment talking about. But the conversation point I can talk about is the fact that the Ravens do need wide receivers. They need a bigger bodied player. I know Mike Williams was released yesterday, and we can talk about him, but he has a lot of injury history. I think Courtland Sutton is the big guy that I would love, but the Broncos essentially shut that all down by saying they're not trading him. So look, it'd be cool if Debo came, it'd be cool if they got one of these bigger bodied wide receivers. I expect the Ravens to still sign a wide receiver, but at the end of the day, I think that, they're going to have to spend some money on a corner, spend some money on a third safety, and that's not going to take, a ton of their resources out. They probably still have one medium-sized move in them. I know a lot of people might be on the Marquise Brown train. I mean, he's a fine player, but I don't think that's the type of receiver the Ravens need. They essentially have a Marquise Brown type player in Zay Flowers. I think you need to complement him with a bigger bodied player as opposed to bringing in another player like him. Even though I think Marquise is still talented, I just think that ship has sailed there. Personally, Reagan's saying Henry is older, but he comes at a great price. He's a perfect match for Lamar in the passing game. Most teams defend the Ravens with lighter, faster guys in the box. No more. That's a good point by Reagan there. I appreciate you bringing that up because with the Ravens, a lot of teams and their strategies in defending the Ravens were, all right, we need sideline to sideline players, quicker, speedier guys. And obviously Gus Edwards was there, and he's a bruiser. J.K. Dobbins had some bruiser elements to him. But Derrick Henry's a whole different animal. The Ravens have two guys now, in Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, that win their one-on-ones in such different ways. Do you put out heavy personnel to stop Derrick Henry, but then you lose the speed of being able to contain a Lamar Jackson potentially? Or do you bring out the lighter packages, but then you lose the ability to tackle Derrick Henry one-on-one without those physical players? You used to have if you were a defense, you play the Ravens over the past couple of seasons, and I've talked about this here and every day. I appreciate you tuning in, first of all, every single day, but also you're probably tired of me saying something like this. But you would always kind of lean into, okay, yeah, Lamar Jackson by far and away is the best player who could potentially have the ball in his hands here. He can make guys miss, he can do this, that, and the other. But now with Derrick Henry, it's like, okay, now if you're a defense, you really don't know who you want to prioritize. And if you make a mistake on defending where the ball is going or reading where the ball is going, it makes it that much more difficult for you and that much more deadly for you because, again, Lamar can juke you out of your shoes if you're a defender, and Derrick Henry can just run you over. So it's two different things, and I think the Ravens will try to exploit those matchups. And look, it'll be a learning process to an extent, right? But I think that's where, again, Derrick Henry said in his press conference, so excited to be playing with Lamar. He's so dynamic. And also, it's the whole conversation about the running backs where, Tony Pollard got $8 million, right? DeAndre Swift got $8 million. You line those guys up, I'm taking Derrick Henry 10 times out of 10, 100 times out of 100. Not that those guys aren't good or quality running backs, but Derrick Henry is just on another level, and you got him at the same going rate as a guy like Tony Pollard or DeAndre Swift. And Henry actually said, the running back market was a bit more lucrative than some people expected. Obviously, the cap going up helped that a little bit. But Henry said he was happy to see running backs get paid on the first day of negotiation window. So guys, obviously, like Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, you can throw Pollard and Swift in that conversation as well. But he said he knew his time would come, knew the Ravens were interested, and that's where he wanted to be anyway. So for him, he said it was just about figuring out the business side of things. And I think, again, the contract, 2 years, $16 million, 20, it goes up to 20, and you also have the $9 million guaranteed. I think that's a really good place for them to be. And it's a bargain to where, again, you can have a conversation about who's better between Saquon and Derrick Henry, who's better between Josh Jacobs and Derrick Henry now. I get the age is a factor, right? Derrick Henry has a lot of tread on his tires too. He's averaged 250 carries over the course of his whole career, or a season at least over the course of his whole career. But it's not like there's Saquon and Josh Jacobs and then a huge gap in Derrick Henry. Even if you think Saquon's better, even if you think Josh Jacobs is better, Derrick Henry is right there, and you at least have to have a conversation about it. And the Ravens got him for $5 million per year less than Saquon and $4 million per year less than Josh Jacobs. So while those guys would have fit in, Aaron Jones obviously would have fit too. He's a guy that on $7 million for 1 year, that would have been a good deal for Baltimore as well. But it's like the yin and the yang, as I've been saying forever. I think that's a really, really intriguing part of what the Ravens can do on the offensive side of the ball. Now, speaking of the Debo stuff, Eric DeCosta literally just shut it down. He said that specific report, I read the Lorax last week at a local elementary school, and I would put that report similar to that. So it's like you kind of put it together and like, oh, okay, he's calling the report baloney or whatever. But it's like also such a specific way of categorizing it, where he's like the Lorax in terms of, I guess, yeah, it's a story, right? Not true. It's not a true story. So that's where you have to figure that out. Now, Eric DeCosta also talked about the Ravens in free agency, saying the hunt goes on to try to find good football players, whether that's a wide receiver, offensive line, pass rushers, corners, whatever it is, a challenge for us to find the money, find the right player. And they also know they have the draft. Eric DeCosta said that. But this year's draft will be a good chance for this team to augment the roster with good, young, cheap, talented football players. And we've talked about it here before. The Ravens have really entered a spot in the Lamar Jackson era where they're going to have to, one, hit on their draft picks and hit on their veteran signings that are either minimum or right at minimum signings. So for those players, it's going to be ever so important that happens for them. And so that's why you see the Ravens trade a Morgan Moses to the Jets, right? Morgan Moses still solid, but he's 33. You move up 22 spots in the fourth, plus you get a sixth. We know Eric DeCosta loves moving up and down the draft board, right? We know they love it. So I think for me, you're going to see the Ravens have deeper draft classes, and Eric DeCosta has said as such where he likes to have as many swings as possible. But this is about not only having swings, but also understanding the classes, both free agency and the draft. I mean, this to me is a move where Eric DeCosta and the Ravens understand that the running back class this year is not very deep, considering what we've seen in recent years compared to what the free agent running back class is this year. If you were to pick, all right, are we going to sign a free agent running back or draft one this year? The much stronger class was free agency, right? So you add a player from the stronger bunch, the stronger class in free agency, and now it's not a need for you anymore. But then you look at the draft versus free agency for tackles. The tackle market in free agency, not as strong, right? A couple of good players, but for the most part, those aren't long-term pieces. You also have to look at positional value, where offensive line is much more of a premium position than running back is. So you would want to draft the tackle. So you have that guy on that cheap 4 or 5 year contract for cap purposes. And it's a longer term piece, especially, for example, you hit it out of the park with like a Kyle Hamilton or Tyler Linderbaum impact pick. You have that guy for 4 or 5 years on that deal. You don't have to worry about signing a guy who's in his mid-20s or early 30s to a bigger contract. You get a better player, and you get them at a cheaper price. So that to me is really important. Eric DeCosta, the Ravens, I think they all certainly understand that as well. Coming up, we will be talking more about Derrick Henry, more about the press conference, more about Ravens free agency, their gains, their potential gains, their losses, and their other potential losses. All that and more coming up on this live instant reaction edition of Locked On Ravens here on Thursday. First, this show is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you could still have an IRA? Robinhood is the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most of your retirement thanks to their IRA with 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. 3% matching on transfers and subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financials, LLC member. SIPC is a registered broker-dealer. We're back. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oshak is still talking with you here on this Thursday. Really appreciate everybody for tuning in and making Locked On Ravens your first listen today and every single day. You can subscribe in video form and in audio form. It's the same show, both audio and video. So if you want to maybe listen one day, watch another, we have you covered. It's the same show, both audio and video. Really appreciate the communities we built up here on YouTube in audio form, even social media. You can find me on Twitter at ChaosStriker34, also Instagram at ChaosStriker34 as well. And if you want to catch these live shows, you can turn notifications on YouTube. But if you can't catch them, you can watch them after the fact in video form or listen to them in audio form as well. I see Zach talking about you got to build a wall around Lamar Jackson. I 100% agree. I think that's where it starts, right? We had that conversation about the offensive line, about building up the trenches. You have 2 pieces right now who are going to start for you next year. That's Ronnie Stanley and Tyler Linderbaum. Now, what are you going to do at left guard? What are you going to do at right guard? What are you going to do at right tackle? I would assume that Andrew Voorhees, Ben Cleveland, Daniel Falele all get shots, but I also think Baltimore might sign a cheaper veteran guard and draft a high up tackle and maybe even draft a high up guard if we're talking about that as well. Ronan saying, y'all think we get T. Higgins to spice up the rivalry trades even more? Yeah. And I see Rogue saying thoughts on Queen going to the Steelers. A lot of intra-divisional moves, interdivisional stuff as we've seen it here. And it even goes beyond Baltimore, right? Saquon goes from the Giants to the Eagles, and Tiki Barber says, you're dead to me, you're dead to us. And now Lamar loves it. He uses it with everybody. But it'd be kind of crazy if T. Higgins got traded to the Ravens. Look, T is that good where he would slot in as the number one next to Lamar. Him and Zay together would be awesome. You kind of have like a 1A, 1B dynamic with those two guys. It'd be awesome. Now, it would take a lot of draft capital. I don't see the Bengals, even trading him in division. I don't think they're going to do that. But it'd also take a lot of draft capital. The thought is fun, but I think it's not necessarily uber realistic for them. And Rogue, to answer your question, it's interesting, right? I think we see this more often than maybe people think, just because, you remember Alejandro Villanueva comes over from Pittsburgh to Baltimore. Arthur Millette did it last year. And now those two, aren't Patrick Queen level players, right? I think this is the first time we've seen this level of a player go from Pittsburgh to Baltimore in a while, or from Baltimore to Pittsburgh, in a while. But we saw Rod Woodson go from Pittsburgh to Baltimore, right? We saw him make that shift over. If you talk about Tennessee, who they had, that rivalry with the Ravens was massive back when the Ravens first started out, in 1996 as a franchise and going over. That was the AFC Central days, right? You have, with Samari Roll and Steve McNair and Derek Mason, and now Derrick Henry is the latest addition to that, right? That was a huge rivalry, and guys were jumping ship. So for this whole thing, yes, is it going to be weird? Yeah, it's a business for both the player and the team. Obviously, Deshaun Elliott also is the latest, is where this happened about an hour ago or so. I think Deshaun Elliott is another former Raven who is now with the Pittsburgh Steelers. He signed a 2-year, $6 million deal. So we're going to see what ends up happening in terms of how those guys match up. We know that Eric DeCosta, he works calculated. It's calculated what he does. And so he was sure to mention all of the players that left, including Patrick Queen, including Geno Stone, etc. But you have one Raven going to Cincinnati, another going to Pittsburgh. Of course, that will rub the fan base the wrong way, considering. And I think, people were upset about Geno, but then once Patrick Queen happened, everybody kind of forgot about Geno. It was like, I'm fine with Geno. It's Patrick Queen who I have the issue with. And that's what people were saying. So look, it happens. They got their money, and Geno Stone actually said this, where he was like, what? Someone asked him, why'd you go there? And Geno responded and said, well, you're asking the wrong person, assuming, he's talking about his agent, and his agent doing the work and saying, hey, we got you a deal here. And Geno Stone said, all right, let's do it. That's where the money is. So these are guys who are looking for their first contracts, big long-term contracts in the NFL. It's unfortunate they have to be with division rivals, but that's just how the business goes. The Ravens will see them twice a year. And, there'll be some added intensity to those rivals 100%. I see Rogue saying, I'd love to see us get Xavier Worthy. I don't know where Worthy goes. I think he's kind of getting talked about now after his combine in like the late first, early second. I've seen people mock him to the Ravens at 30. If we're talking wide receiver, I'd rather have a guy like Mitchell, or, talking about a Xavier Legette type player. I think Ricky Pearsall is someone that, in the second round could be an option for them. I know there's a lot of conversation about like Brian Thomas and Troy Franklin and those guys, but I think Mitchell is my top target at 30. But I still think that with how many good tackles there are, they'll probably do, maybe a tackle at 30, wide receiver in the second, or if you want to, you can flip-flop it. But I will say, just a little stat, if the Ravens do draft a wide receiver, Eric DeCosta took over this team in 2019. You draft Marquise Brown in 2019 in the first round, Rashad Bateman in 2021 in the first round. You got Zay Flowers last year in the first round. It would be the fourth time in 6 years that Eric DeCosta drafts a wide receiver in the first round, which I think might be a little bit too much of draft capital going to one position. But if it's a talented player, it's a talented player. I see Zach saying, do you think if Lamar Jackson wins the championship for the Ravens that there'll be a statue of Lamar? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think so. There might even be a statue of Lamar if he doesn't win a championship, right? We'll see. Obviously, there's a bit more of a deeper conversation if the championship does not happen. But I still think that, yes, if Lamar wins a championship 100%, Zach, I think there will be a statue for sure. So what comes next for the Ravens? Let's round this out with that. I think that there are a couple of ways the Ravens could go here. They could try to maybe stay a little on the quieter side, let the market develop even further, but I'm not sure they have that luxury this year because they're losing so many players. So I think that as guys go off the board, Jadeveon Clowney reportedly visiting Carolina today. We're going to see what happens with Odell Beckham. I don't think he comes back. I predict him to go to Kansas City. I think J.K. Dobbins goes to either Dallas or Kansas City. I mean, in my opinion, the Ravens can kind of, they can play it a certain way, but I think that they're going to have to make a couple of veteran signings. And this will be, I don't know. In my opinion, it'll be almost like a process. I mean, the Ravens literally got a contribution out of major contributions out of Kyle Van Noy, and they signed him in week 3. So this is an ever ongoing process, right? It's not just, they didn't sign anybody else outside of Derrick Henry in the first week of free agency, and that's that. But to me, there are still added avenues. And the draft, to me, we're not going to know necessarily who the Ravens will be targeting in the draft until we get a little bit more of, what the Ravens have. So do they sign a veteran wide receiver? Do they sign a third safety? Do they sign a third corner? That will eliminate some needs and maybe push needs back, or honestly make them more important if they don't. So I see conversation. Terry saying we're missing the playoffs, so we go O-line instead of wide receiver round 1, and saying we can go O-line round 2. I actually agree with you, Terry, where the Ravens can get a quality tackle in the second round, right? It's just that deep of a class. But I just don't know. And the draft board plays out certain ways. I think, to me, if a Patrick Paul is available in the second round and then you're able to get a Mitchell in the first, I'd be totally fine with Mitchell and Patrick Paul first and second round. I'd also be totally fine with Armarius Mims and, Xavier Legette. I'd be fine with that as well. So I think either way, what you do have to realize for both positions, there aren't a ton of long-term pieces. The Ravens are going to need essentially 4 new starters in the next 2 or 3 years, maybe even 2 years. But they also need more wide receivers, because the only wide receiver who is not on the roster, or who is on the roster, the only wide receiver who is on the roster past next season is Zay Flowers. So there are needs both ways. They're going to need to invest both money and draft capital in both positions in the next 2 to 3 seasons. This is a deep wide receiver class. It's a deep tackle class. Again, if you pick Mitchell and Patrick Paul round 1, round 2, I'm on board. If you pick Mitch, or if you pick, I don't know, what, you could even be like a Latham or a Jordan Morgan or one of those guys too. You pick a guy like, even if Troy Fautanu falls, which he won't, it's my pipe dream, but he won't do it. But if you pick an offensive tackle round 1 and then you take Legette in round 2 as well, I think, I see Terry talking about the Yale offensive tackle. There are so many. Kingsley, right? There are a lot of players. So Baltimore will have a lot of different avenues, but the way that free agency goes over the next, week, 2 weeks leading up to the draft will give us a better indication of where the Ravens are looking at needs-wise. So Derrick Henry, a Raven, Eric DeCosta, even John Harbaugh said, that he's excited to have Derrick Henry on his side. He expects the AFC North Physicality to go up with Derrick Henry there as well. Really exciting stuff. Is Henry now a member of the Ravens and now officially introduced and signed? And by the way, just to round it out, he will wear number 22 for the Ravens. I know there was a lot of speculation about him potentially wearing number 2. Ward to Ward, Alabama, but he decided to go number 22. So Pepe Williams, these New Jersey number, we'll figure out what that is probably in the coming weeks, or maybe they won't announce that for a while. But that's all I have here today on this live edition of Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be right back here tomorrow, 6 a.m. Eastern, or maybe even sooner if the Ravens make another big move. We're talking Ravens, of course. Stay tuned, subscribe, follow along, video form, audio form, follow on social medias. We'll really appreciate the support. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.